Well, good afternoon. I'm Father David. Thank you for joining me today for Disciple Time as we're moving into week 3 of Lent. And hopefully, you are plugged in to our small group series, The Chosen. This week, our focus is on grieve as Jesus grieves. And we looked at the sacrament of the dying this past Sunday. But, speaking of grieve as Jesus grieves, when I was in the Army, there was one particular sergeant there that hated me to the core because while I was in training, I decided to get baptized and have a religious experience. So the Army chaplain pulled our unit over to a creek one Saturday while we were moving to training, and he baptized me right there in the creek. And this particular sergeant did not like the fact that I was having this religious experience while he was in the process of trying to break me down and mold me into a trained killer that would execute orders without question, without thinking. And so basically, from that point forward, that sergeant went out of his way to make sure I paid for that choice, for that inconvenience. And he gave me a new nickname after that and made sure I felt his aggravation whenever he could. In fact, just about every time I saw him or he saw me, the first thing he would say is, "Do push-ups," followed by my nickname. And if I had an attitude about it, well, that was all the more reason to make it last longer. And it got to the point that I would just start doing push-ups whenever I saw him walking up because I was a grunt and he was a sergeant in a position of power, and that's the way it was in the military. Well, that's what I thought about when I read the Old Testament readings today from Daniel chapter 3. So let me give you the situation here that the three Hebrews find themselves in, right? So we read in Daniel chapter 3, verse 4 through 6, "Then the herald loudly proclaimed, 'Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace.'" Well, not a good situation for a group of people who had received revelation from their God given through Moses the prophet that they were not to bow down before any graven image. So the choice here was pretty plain and simple, right? Adhere to the revelation of God given in Torah, or adhere to the mandates of a tyrannical despot. So what is a despot? Well, a despot is a ruler or some person who holds absolute power over another individual, typically one who exercises that power in a very cruel, oppressive way. And this could be anyone in a position of power, really, that abuses their authority. So fast forward a bit, right? The horns blow, the music sounds, and all the people around start bowing, but not those three Hebrews. They decide in that moment they are going to adhere to the Torah rather than obey King Nebuchadnezzar. They're going to stand in their liberty as human beings made by God and for God. And so Nebuchadnezzar has them thrown into the fiery furnace. So anyone ever cross someone in power and kind of get tossed into the fire of their wrath? When I think about that, I kind of think of the stories Bishop Jim has told about his experience with his former bishop, and I definitely experienced that with the sergeant that I mentioned in my army story. So what does Azariah do? Now, here's an interesting side note, right, about Azariah. Whenever you study the Bible, it's kind of a neat thing to look at what the Hebrew name means, because in this case, the guy's actual name, Azariah, means helped by God. So what does helped by God do? His nickname? He starts by admitting Israel hasn't been perfect in the law. He admits that he has nothing to offer God himself, right? And I think this can stop a lot of us from going to God in prayer. We think maybe he won't listen to us. We think we're unworthy of divine intercession. We think we're unworthy of that rescue because of our past or our present. But maybe this story is here to remind us that God doesn't engage us based on some scorecard of our behavior, right? So Azariah, he says this, Lord, we follow you with our whole heart. We reverence you and we seek your face. Do not put us to shame, but deal with us in your kindness and great mercy. Deliver us in accord with your wonders and bring glory to your name, O Lord. So guess what? God hears Azariah's prayers and responds to it, and the fire does not burn them. The heat that the ruler wanted to bring upon them was unable to burn them, and God upheld him. So what's the application? I think it's this. When you're being treated cruelly or unfairly by someone in power, just call out to God, because he's going to keep that situation from burning you up. Well, thank you for joining me for our week 3 look at Lent. I hope you can join me next week.